Well, this talks back to the idea of, sometimes we're forced to change our behavior, right? And this is one of those moments. So, governments put things in place. There's a new set of rules of play as to how we can interact, how we can get together, how we have meetings, how we talk to our colleagues, to our clients, etc. And in this case, the context changes of how we normally operate, right? So we're in uncharted territories, and for many people, that's very disruptive because it's a very different way of operating than they normally have. And then there are people who are much more used to being able to work online or, working remotely, who might have a different skill set or have trained their muscles differently in their head in terms of how they deal with this kind of cognitive load that we get from, being on screens most of the time. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic because obviously the events industry, the live events industry on site has come to a grinding halt for many. But at the same time, the functions of communications haven't changed.
No.
And there's actually a larger set of functions that you can tap into when you have, when all of a sudden you open new channels of how you do things. And for some people, these channels are new. For others, they are channels that they've been using for a longer time. So I think there's kind of there's a legacy thing, but there's also a availability thing that now becomes much more available to everyone all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, but I suppose my thought with it is with people who have, obviously got those channels already set up, it's not always about finding new ways of doing things. And I suppose a lot of people at the moment have been jumping on the bandwagon of going hybrid events. We've got to do something new. We've got to find a new platform, a new way of working. But I mean, from what I could tell, it's not always about that.
No, it's rewiring how you use a group of brains to work together, right? Even if they're not in proximity of each other. And so there's some things that are different there. And there's a lot of new things that happen when you have more distance between people. So the old age adagium of, nothing beats live and having proximity, I think will never change. But it's how you literally deal with the functions of communications that are different that will allow you to design differently. And I think it's just a question of being aware of that, using experience of different people together and creating a new experience. So it's not a singular thing that one person does. So any predictors out there that are predicting the future on hybrid events, bad news for you. You need other people to think with you. But the good news is that there's ways to do that, right? And one of the ways that we developed is called, is applying design to how you create an event, how you create the event story from multiple stakeholder perspectives. And you use all the classical things that we all know, right? Perspective shifting, stakeholder views. It's about zooming in and zooming out. And this is, the old age zoom on a camera, on a photo camera or video camera where you twist something and then things come closer or go further away. Not like the zoom that we're using right now. And then there's the angle at which you look at things, the altitude or the frequency at which you look at things. And these are all things you can play with. And the more you experiment with it, the more you discover things about it and what it does to people. We've been doing a lot of experimentation with our own kind of trainings that used to be all face-to-face with Post-its and posters and, in close proximity of groups of, teams of 7 working and scaling that up. People that have been to our live and our online version of the training of the Event Design Certificate Program have told us that the online learning experience might even bring a higher skill set to the learner during the same amount of time, because they're forced to use new tools that they might not have used before, right? So collaborative tools like, we use Mural to collaborate online and visualize what people are saying whilst they're saying it. It also puts a much more balanced feel between the different participants in that space. Sometimes suppressing audio or video can be a super powerful tool, right? To get deeper thinking or to pause or, so there's a lot of techniques and things that can be applied. And then when you start applying them in a hybrid, right? So we just did a training in, was it October? No, at the end of September, for the Thailand Convention Bureau and their partners, where they were all in a live space at the Sukhothai Hotel in Bangkok, and my colleague Roel and I were delivering the training with a lot of hands-on, let's say, support on site by the team in Bangkok. And we replicated both, the live and the online component of it, with breakout spaces, both live and breakout spaces also in Zoom, having individual workstations whilst people were in the same room, still having proximity of the brains. So we did, so we do a lot of that testing and trying, and, providing the infrastructure is in place and people know what they're doing, and there's a willingness to experiment. And we tend to say, if you don't break anything, you're not experimenting hard enough, right? So we're always having that get out of jail free card on the table to get people to go into that direction. And the learning, then you can see the learning because it's in the application that you can validate the learning. So if people subsequently are able to design an event using the methodology that they've learned during the 3 days within 6 months after the training, then apparently the learning has happened. And you can check whether it's different from the live, the fully online where everybody's in an individual station, or the combination of live and online, right? The hybrid version. And hybrid is not just live and online combined. It's any two things that are normally not combined that are then recombined, right? Or combined in a new way.
Okay, yeah.
Because hybrid doesn't mean anything except combining two things that normally haven't been combined.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be online versus
No, it doesn't have to involve the internet per se, which is a little bit of a challenge because most people now are reliant on their connection through the internet, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting, we've done a lot of work with the Internet Society, who are the people that built the internet, and how they run their events is by applying the same, like the internet way of working, right? So, which is you need to have a way to connect networks, because the internet is a network of networks, right? 70,000 networks that are interconnected. And what you have to have is a protocol on how you connect them. So really event design is like a protocol on how to connect brains to scenarios of prototypes of how events could take place. And then all you need is, the same kind of basic infrastructure. So a way to send and receive a message, a way to code and decode it. If you need to encrypt it, you need to encrypt and decrypt it. That's if you're working on a computer with keyboards or mouses. So it's actually super logical if you start to think about it.
Yeah.
And the problem
it's
we have is we're
direct.
so stuck in our ways of doing events in a specific way that, we haven't stopped. We haven't stopped to think about what the options are. And so people just panic because one option is taken off the table and then they don't have other prototypes in their head.
Yeah. And I imagine there are loads of different prototypes. I mean, you showed the IKEA of event design. I'm sure there are loads of different variants in all of those, different ways
it's
people
limitless.
take it.
Laura, like in music, right? Give people, 5 bars on a thing and some flats and sharps, and you give them a time code and you give them some black dots and some dashes, and look at what happened in the wonderful world of music, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They went from analog to digital back in the late 70s, early 80s, right? And this is a metaphor we used at IBTM 15 years ago when we were talking about worlds colliding. Look at what the early musicians did. People like Herbie Hancock, people like, the ones that started taking analog musical instruments and turned them into digital. And look at where we are today, right? It's only like, 20, 30 years later. And there's no shortage of new music, and we're all using the same amount of notes, right?
Absolutely. I mean, people keep saying on the radio, oh, in time, we'll get repetitions, songs will repeat themselves, they'll sound the same. Hasn't happened yet. And I doubt it will for a long time. Yeah.
So the universality of music, we like to use that metaphor because what the sheet music is to music, the event canvas is to events, right? So it's a way to compose and create an idea. Only the composition doesn't happen by one person. It happens by a team of people with diverse brains, diverse thinking, diverse
like an orchestra.
And they don't need to know anything about event designs or events to design, right? Some of the best event designers are students at university or even earlier schools who we equip with a methodology. And they don't need to worry about how difficult or easy it is to actually deliver that event, but they can create prototypes like there's no tomorrow, right? they're super creative.
Yeah,
and that's our constraint,
suppose if
is
you
that
think
we're boxed into this thinking that we need to just, get away from.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose we focus so much on can it be done that we stop to think of what we might want to do.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time
I like how you said that. Yeah.
things. Yeah, I think a lot of the time I've heard, I was talking to another speaker yesterday who's talking about, the future of events in a lot more broad sense, and he said something along the lines of, when you believe that everything is possible, when you decide that everything is in the future is possible, and everything in the future is able to be done, there aren't any barriers in the way. What do you want to do? Like, when nothing is holding you back, what do you want to do? And I think that's something we as an events industry really need to start thinking about. What now we've got all these opportunities, what is it that we can do
There's a
with them?
problem. There is a problem with that statement that you're just saying, because if there are no restrictions or boundaries to things, all of a sudden creativity falls to a very low level. Right. So
it depends what are the boundaries, I suppose.
So it's really kind of, without boundaries or restrictions, it's really hard to design, right? We call that the design frame. And the more elements you have in the design frame, these are all about team, time, and space, right? So, but also about financial restrictions, or the more restrictions, the more creative the team becomes in creating prototypes. So,
because you have to work around things, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, our species, apparently humans, have this thing called the prefrontal cortex that you can use to future cast. If I do this, then that. But all of our prefrontal cortexes are wired differently, because we have different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of looking at things. And that's the reason why a team of people has to do this together to get to a better outcome, right? And you have to validate some of the outcomes as you go through it. So I fully agree that, you need to reimagine what the future looks like, but you need to have a system or a way to do that. And you need to add restrictions to do it effectively. Because just saying everything's possible, go ahead and do it. What happens then is you get a complete stall, right?
Yeah, you go, well, what do I do? Yeah.
If there's too many options, then you don't know what to choose. It's like going to a restaurant with 16 pages of menu versus the restaurant that has choice A or B, right?
Yeah.
Prototyping is all about saying, here are 3 ways in which you could do it, which an expert team of chefs has thought about before, right?
Yeah, and they've decided this is the right way.
So if we're in October, right, you cannot get, fresh asparagus, for instance, right, in this part of the world. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this is the logic that the people have that have the expertise, right?
Yeah.
But the nice thing about
they know.
The nice thing about managing a design process, or being an event designer or being an event owner, is that just like in a restaurant, you don't have to know how to cook the asparagus in order to manage the process of getting asparagus on the plate, or creating value add by putting them on a very nice plate with silver things and sauce hollandaise and a nice decorum, and all of a sudden the asparagus go up in value, like you know.
Yeah.
But you need that team of expertise to go and deliver that. So I think there's good news for the events industry, that all of the skill sets that are currently present are required. They're not going to be required in the same way.
No.
And so you have to let go of that notion of, when do we get back to that past state, because it might never exist anymore, or it might be completely morphed.
Yeah. And there's nothing to say that the future is not going to be better. I mean, we're very focused on the fact that the past, because of the restrictions that we've got nowadays, we're very focused on the fact that, it was better when we could do live events and we didn't have to worry about, health, temperature screenings and travel restrictions and all that sort of stuff. But who's to say that what we develop during this time, we maybe won't want to go back to that way? We'll want to stay with a hybrid model so people can find it more accessible from across the world and don't have to travel so much, and the sustainability support of it and all that sort of stuff. Who's to say that it won't be better? Who knows?
And I think it's all about the functionality of things. So it's not so much about the content, but about the functionality. So and I can't help but think about that beautiful grand piano, the Steinway and Sons, however the big thing is. carrying that up a flight of stairs is not entirely ideal, right? Now people might have something on their iPad that sounds like a Steinway and Sons. It's not the same thing.
No.
But carrying around an orchestra or having Spotify in your pocket are two completely different concepts around the same thing called I want to enjoy music, right?
Yeah.
So the function of what it is and how it works, and that's the kind of thinking we will have. I think, we don't talk about black and white and color TV anymore, right? It's just one of the channels.
Yeah.
But now I can watch it on my device, whatever I have with me. And so the same thing will happen to events. Like the way we talked about events, there's live or hybrid or online. Those are all going to blur into multiple options of things that, when we look back, we're going to go, why didn't we understand that? When we're in 2024, we're going to look back and go, how stupid were we back then in 2020 when we were just faced with masks and the scare of a new epidemic?
Yeah.
And so what we have to force ourselves to do is to take this moment to stop and think about this, right? We like to call that, claiming event design time, which is for any event that you do, can you, spend at least 1% of the total event time. So let's say, 800 people go to an event for 10 hours. That's 800 hours. Spend 1% of that time, right? 8 hours with a team of people. Let's say there's 5 people thinking about it, or 4 people, or 7 people. Spend a good hour or 2 hours designing what that experience looks like for the 8 hours or 10 hours of the 800 people. That's a no-brainer, right? Like, let me claim some time now to think about what those other people will experience then.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, many people aren't doing that, or doing it very inefficiently, right? There's no process behind how to think about the event design. And so that's one of the problems we've tackled with creating the event canvas and, coding and decoding the sheet music. It doesn't mean you're not a good musician if you can't read the sheet music, right? There's tons of really good musicians out there that haven't ever read a note of music because they have an intuition how to do it. But put them in an orchestra of 45 people, with a new piece of music, and it's a pretty disastrous experience, however good they may play the violin, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for this. I think we're creating new aptitudes, a new language, a new conversation. And people that are equipped with it are much more comfortable and much less stressed. And they have a superpower, which is the ability to orchestrate others with their brains to co-create something that will create value in the future. So it's getting everyone on the same page without stressing out, whilst we're kind of stuck in work from home situations.
Yeah, managing everything.
Yeah.
But yeah. Awesome.
So it's a really complex way of saying, okay, let's learn a new language. It's never fun to learn a new language because it can be painful at first. But it's a visual language, so it's a lot of fun, and it transcends a lot of other borders. It's available in multiple languages, so it's not all that painful. And the process itself of learning it is fun.
Yeah.
Which the only time I've experienced that when I learned a language was when I moved to other countries and learned with other people who didn't know either, right? If you're put in the midst of people who know exactly how the language works, you feel pretty stupid. Yeah. And it's painful for the first couple of weeks. But, the earlier you start, the quicker you learn it and the more benefit you have. I mean, look at anybody that speaks multiple languages today is basically better off in this profession because they can get better understood.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I've tried to learn languages before through apps, and like you say, it's just not the same as learning it with other people because there's just so much more dialogue you can create when you've got someone, coming back to you on things.
Yeah. And I think this is part of like enjoying the learning, when we do our program, we tend to stay at this hotel that has all these funky things on the wall. It's called a student hotel. It's this chain of hotels where students stay and also professionals stay. But I have this one, actually they have a bag. I think I have it here somewhere. It says, may the student in you live forever. And I think that's kind of the mindset that if you apply that to events and you keep studying events more closely and you keep coding and decoding how they create value, and then understand how to use that in practice with a team of people, I think that's the most desirable skill set at the moment. not just because we want to just keep creating events, but any change by at least two stakeholders of behavior is an event, right?
Yeah.
We could consider Corona as, a massive global event. It's pretty successful at changing our behavior, right? The only problem is it's not in the desired direction of change, right? So, and the same with events. If you just let an event happen without knowing where it needs to end up in terms of behavior change, you're just going to end up somewhere else.
Yeah, because you've not guided it in the way that it needed to go.
But if you think about the intention of where it needs to go in the future, just like a movie script or whatever it might be, and you know what the end behavior are that you have at the end of the movie or the end of this event, if you have that intentionally written down and you have that script of where it's going, and you can visualize that future picture, when people can picture something, they can go there. When they can't picture it, they're just lost.
Yeah.
So, and I think now a lot of people are just lost. Yeah, because they don't have the picture.
No, and that's what you need to create, isn't it?
Yeah. And it sounds really hard, but it's actually super easy. It's all you need is some team time and space, right? A couple of people. Team of 7 is good, but they don't need to know anything about the subject. That's the advantage. You need some space, right? Literally, maybe online on Mural or on a wall or whatever you have. And you need some time, right? Just not enough time is our formula for time. Yeah. So you're always a little bit in a rush, and then you do your best thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, nice one. Brilliant. Well, thank you for giving me your time today, and thanks for talking through that all with me. That was really interesting.
It's my pleasure.